Hey, it's Linda here, and I wanted to talk about different ways you can try to stay longer in your job if you can't leave it just yet. These are all things that I've done in my previous jobs to stay longer, and there are a plethora of reasons why you might stay longer. Maybe you don't have the savings to quit, or you don't have a job lined up, or you haven't been there long enough and you want to stay there at least a year to have it on your resume and stuff like that. And at the end, I have some ruminations about staying at your job and quitting without something lined up. We'll talk about that and how maybe my opinion has slowly been changing about that as well. So the first thing, you can try to ask for part-time. At my last job, we qualified for part-time after working there 6 months, and you can get part-time hours with full benefits if you work at least 21 hours a week. So that was for my job. You want to check with your HR and your company if they have something similar, but it doesn't hurt to ask. And so I was able to do part-time at my last job for the last few months there. The second thing you could try to do is ask for flexible hours. So I had coworkers that instead of doing the regular 9 to 5 or 8 to 6 hours for their job, they were able to come in, especially if they need to be in the office, they were able to come in even earlier at like 6 a.m. and leave around 3, and then they get to miss a lot of traffic if they live far from the city, etc. So asking for flexible hours like that might help as well. The third thing you could do is ask for remote work. If you don't already work remotely, you can ask for some remote work either just once in a while, or it could be a permanent thing. You want to check with your manager and HR as well. But a lot of managers will be able to give you once in a while work from home ability if they're good managers as well. One other thing I did for my job is I took a longer break, about a month break, maybe some might call it a mini sabbatical. And so you might be able to do this as well. So whether it's like for a vacation or just mental health, just taking a break longer than like 1 or 2 weeks, you can ask for that as well. And I was able to at my job. Another thing you can try to look for if you are feeling burnt out or not really liking your current position but can't leave is look for a position in the same company. Check the internal job boards. Talk to different teams on what they do to get more information. And so this helps with, you'll be able to keep the amount of tenure, and especially on your resume, it will show the total amount of years at one company. And it will also help with things like if you qualify for certain benefits like 401k vesting or more vacation hours only after like 3 or 6 years at the company. This will help with that too, so that's another option. Next, this one might seem like an obvious one, but admittedly it took me a while to actually start doing this, is express overwhelm to your manager or your boss. Express that you need help, that you're either falling behind, feeling stressed, or just have too many tasks that you need help with them. And when I first started my career, I couldn't really fathom this because it's a really toxic trait I had of overworking myself. Like when I heard one of my coworkers first express that she was feeling overwhelmed to our boss, I was thinking in my head like, oh my gosh, I can't believe she actually told her boss that, because I guess like in my mind, I wanted to come off like I was strong and I don't know what kind of fears I had expressing that. But it helps a lot, even if they can't really necessarily take things off your plate. It helps to have words of encouragement, especially from your boss. At least for me, it helped, words of encouragement. Like when I was feeling overwhelmed, they'll explain like, you're doing really good, you got this, you're not doing anything wrong. That helped a lot, because I think more people than we realize have the fear of getting fired or being fired, thinking they're always doing something wrong at a job. And so expressing where you're struggling, it would help when bosses like actually implement something or help reassign something to more of the team to help with the workload and stuff like that. But it also helps even with words of encouragement. And a lot of times your boss might not know that unless you express it to them. So if they're a good boss, they'll be able to be supportive of you being able to express your struggles versus looking at you in like you're weak or something. The other thing you can do is definitely use a sick day or vacation day or two immediately as soon as you can. You know, you've worked for those vacation days, you should use them. So use them immediately. Don't wait too long. I think I went a year with just using like 4 vacation days and I was really burnt out. But yeah, definitely don't forget to use those. And so this is the part of the video where I want to ruminate on some things. If you tried these things and it's just not working, maybe you have a really toxic work environment, a toxic boss, and the only other option really is to just leave. So to give you examples of some toxic bosses I had, for instance, when I asked for a couple days off, but it was like longer than expected for a part-time job, my boss was like, so you just want to quit? So you're just going to quit? And so that was kind of shocking. I think it was for I wanted a few days off for my high school graduation and stuff. And yeah, so he was a really toxic boss. And I left that job pretty soon. Luckily, you know, that was kind of low stakes because I was still in high school. And so it was kind of like a low stakes non-career job. Another time that toxicity happened is when I planned to take off 3 weeks to go to Laos to visit my grandparents, and that would be, unbeknownst to me, the last time that I saw my grandpa alive. And I hadn't been to Laos in a couple of years, and I already planned it way ahead of time. My boss seemingly was able to approve it, but then the whole company policy from the executive level changed where they wouldn't let anybody take off more than 2 weeks at a time. That was a new policy implemented. And I understand my boss's point of view. Their hands were tied because it came from the executive level, and they said, Linda, we won't be able to approve you for the full 3 weeks. And I stood firm and I said, I need those 3 weeks. And so first, my immediate manager was trying to convince me, and he was like, what would happen? What can we do, like, so that you could only do 2 weeks? Like, what would happen if you couldn't do those 3 weeks? And I basically told him, I stood firm. I told him it's 3 weeks or that's it. That's it. Basically, I insinuated like, you know, I'm not going to be here anymore if it's not. And by that time, I had worked there for years and I was a top performer. And so I definitely showed my value and my worth during that time. But still, like, that's something that was non-negotiable for me, going to see my family, some I would see for the last time. And so it got escalated up to his manager. And luckily, my bosses, I knew my boss, I don't blame my bosses at all. Their hands were tied. But luckily, his boss was able to approve it. And he was like, Linda, you know, I just want to say first, like, you are able to go. We were able, like, don't worry about it. And you don't have to worry about it anymore. You are able to go. And I was about to cry then. But yeah, eventually they came through, you know. So I don't blame like my managers for how they acted because that came from the executive level. But those are some examples where I was like ready to be like, you know, that's something I can't negotiate on. Another example is that when I expressed overwhelm to my boss in another job. This was a different job. He was a boss that I really respected and got along with for years. But then there was this moment where shit hit the fan, and I realized he did not have my back when things were tough. And so I was basically getting taken advantage of by another team and another manager. And he wasn't sticking up for me, having my back. And I was like even crying in his office, expressing overwhelm. And so when I realized he didn't have my back, I gave my 2 weeks notice at the end of that week. I alluded to this in the beginning of the video on like my thoughts changing on this of having a job lined up before you leave. And that's something that I'm still struggling with. That last example that I shared where I gave my 2 weeks notice at the end of the week, I luckily had a job lined up. And I luckily was able to go online, find a job right away. It was a lot easier to find a job, at least for myself, during that time versus now. And nowadays, it's definitely tough to find a job. But I think I'm still kind of teetering on, I still caution recommending leaving a job without anything lined up. And especially because like I kind of view these videos as something I want to share with my kids, something I would tell my own kids. I feel like it would be irresponsible for me to say, oh, go ahead, leave a job without something lined up, because those worst case scenarios have happened to me where I didn't have a job and I was looking for one. I just wanted to share these words of warning. So this is why I highly, highly, highly recommend trying to find a job before you leave your last one, because these worst case scenarios happened to me. I find that it's always easier to find a new job when you already have one. When you don't have a job, there's so many things working against you trying to find one. I've had recruiters say to me, like, why do you have a gap in your resume? Also, try to stay at your job at least a year. If you don't stay there a year, you might as well leave that job completely off your resume. Because I've also had recruiters say, like, I had one job where I stayed in for 8 months, and that one was really toxic, and I left it for another job that actually reached out to me, and it was a much better job. But I only was there for 8 months, and recruiters have questioned that 8 months. And also, on that note, with staying less than a year, my immediate manager flat out refused to reference me, give me a referral. So, you know, different managers, I think that manager was pretty toxic. Different managers might have different reactions, might still be able to give you a referral if they're better managers, but mine didn't. And that definitely was due in part to because I was there less than a year. And so because it happened to me, I have those scars, right? And so definitely stay at least a year if you can help it. Try to leave on good terms, even if, you know, you really don't like your boss. And like I put in my 2 weeks notice a week after I realized my boss was not having my back. I still tried to leave on good terms with everybody because I want to continue to work and make money. I wanted to continue to have those connections. I didn't want to be blacklisted from any industry or role or anything. So like, just keep a good face if you can. And so be an adult about it, you know? And okay, so that's like working for at least a year and having a job lined up. So if you don't, and if you find yourself unemployed for some time, I've had recruiters ask about that too. So there were a few instances in my career where I did have to leave a job, and I had nothing lined up, and those were when I was laid off. I was laid off twice in my career. And the first time I was laid off, I didn't really stress at first because I immediately got a offer to do an internship, a paid internship afterwards. I was doing my MBA during that time. So when I got laid off, I was like, oh, I'll find a job soon. I turned down that offer because I was getting interviews from like Google and Netflix and so many other companies, but I didn't get another offer for another almost a year. So I was unemployed for a year until I found a job after my layoff. And I go into that story in other videos how I think it was like mostly bad luck because eventually like I interviewed with Google again and got a job. And so I was like interviewing every single week. I applied to over 1,000 roles. And anyways, so I was trying my hardest. I was a good candidate, but it just didn't work out for a year. So when I got new interviews afterwards and I got laid off again in the future, recruiters would sort of ask me and chastise me about that 1 year gap in employment. And it wasn't enough, apparently, for me to say I was laid off. I was looking for a job every single day of the week. I was interviewing every week. I explained that to the recruiter when they asked, like, what were you doing during that year? And I said I was interviewing every single day. And the recruiter really tried to press me and was asking, like, but what were you doing? It was a whole year, but what were you doing? And I mean, I could have told her also, like, hey, I was also doing my MBA. I switched to full-time as well. And I was doing projects here and there. Like I was doing, kind of freelance projects that were really not paying anything. So, and I was doing like internships, like short internships that were unpaid in between, but like they were just kind of small projects, such small projects that I didn't include them in my resume, and maybe I should have, but honestly, like you shouldn't need to explain that you shouldn't need to go through explaining all that if you're laid off and unemployed and trying your hardest to look for a job. So because I'm scarred from that also, like that's why if you can help it, I recommend if you have the power to stay at your job until you find another one, try your hardest to do that, because of situations that can occur like that when you're unemployed. Yeah, I still stick by the fact that it's just easier to get another job when you already have a job. And this is where it's a little bit, I do understand it. My opinion kind of I feel like it can shift and change a little bit here because mental health and your own physical and mental well-being is so important that now I'm kind of changing to the mindset of if you have the funds, if you have an emergency fund to float you by at least a few months, much better if it's a whole entire year, because people like me have been unemployed not by choice for a year. If you have the funds, if it's a toxic job, go ahead and quit. And if you don't have the funds, I think that you could try to find a way, like just try to find a way to make it work, whatever your choice is. Whether you quit, whether you stay, you got to find that grit in you to really just provide for yourself any way you can. And, that's really the end of it, like having the grit to make things work. So anyways, that was my talk for ways you could use to try to help stay at your job longer If you feel like you want to leave for whatever reason but can't, and if it for whatever reason doesn't work out and you need to leave, try to land any type of income or job before you leave, unless you have a good plan for how you're gonna fund your life in between. All right, so that's the video. Thanks for watching. Bye.